Welcome to the Daily Deep Dive 3D Initiative of UPSC with Sarv Kaushik.
Glad to be here.
So, consider this for a moment. Every single time the global price of a barrel of crude oil drops by, say, $10, the Indian economy effectively pockets a staggering $12 to $14 billion in annual savings.
Yeah, the math on that is wild.
It is. And today we're going to explore how a single, incredibly precarious diplomatic signature halfway across the world just handed India this massive economic windfall, and why that windfall might really only last for a fleeting 60-day window.
Right, which is a terrifyingly short timeline.
Exactly. So our mission today is to take a mountain of fragmented current affairs from June 16, 2026, and fuse them into one cohesive geopolitical and socioeconomic map for you.
Basically connecting all the dots.
Yes. We are going to travel from the industrial assembly lines of Central Europe up to the cutting-edge tech hubs of the Nordics, plunge straight into the volatile geopolitics of the Middle East, and then shift our gaze completely inward.
To our own domestic issues.
Right. We need to look closely at India's own societal fabric, the tidal wave of foreign capital entering our markets, and finally zoom right down to the neighborhood level to examine how we are planning our mega cities to survive an increasingly hostile climate.
It is a genuinely massive canvas. I mean, when you are analyzing this for your policy understanding, the vital realization is that none of these events exist in a vacuum, right?
Everything is totally linked.
Exactly. A diplomatic handshake in an Eastern European capital fundamentally alters the calculus for defense manufacturing hubs in South India. A single liquefied natural gas tanker navigating a narrow strait in the Persian Gulf directly dictates the price of vegetables a family buys in Gujarat.
Which is mind-blowing when you really think about it.
It is. So we are going to put all of this through our analytical lens to understand not just what the headlines say, but the underlying mechanisms at play. You know, we need to understand the why and the how behind the shifting grand stratagems of nations.
And what it specifically demands of India's future resilience.
Yeah.
So let's start building that map right in the heart of Europe. Prime Minister Modi just completed a historic first-ever visit to Bratislava.
The capital of Slovakia.
Right, and the historical context here is super important. No Indian prime minister has visited Bratislava since Slovakia became an independent nation in 1993.
Yeah, following the Velvet divorce from Czechoslovakia.
Exactly. So this isn't just some routine diplomatic layover. They have officially elevated bilateral ties to a comprehensive partnership and inked 11 distinct agreements.
We're covering a lot of ground.
Yeah, we were talking defense, digital technology, space, labor migration, and there's also this fantastic historical anchor to their relationship that I found in the notes. Back in 2017, India's ISRO actually launched Slovakia's very first satellite into space.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which has served as this enduring baseline of trust between the two. But when I look at the broader European theater, I have to ask, why is India putting so much diplomatic weight into Slovakia right now?
Well, to understand the why, you really have to look at Slovakia's structural position within the European economy.
Okay.
See, Slovakia is a member of both the European Union and NATO, which provides it with an immense institutional security and economic umbrella. But more importantly, on a functional day-to-day level, it is an absolute industrial powerhouse in Central Europe.
Like manufacturing.
Massive manufacturing. It is one of the most concentrated automotive manufacturing hubs per capita in the entire world. You have highly advanced production plants for Volkswagen, Stellantis, Kia, Jaguar Land Rover operating right there.
Oh, I didn't realize the concentration was that high.
It's huge. They possess advanced manufacturing capabilities, precision engineering skills, and frictionless access to the entire EU single market. What India brings to the table is the exact complement to that.
Right, our demographic scale.
Exactly. Unparalleled demographic scale, a massive and growing consumer market, and highly cost-effective manufacturing capabilities.
You know, I was reading through the details of these 11 agreements, and the dynamic really reminds me of building a global tech stack.
How do you mean?
Well, in this scenario, Slovakia is providing the highly specialized hardware and the incredibly efficient physical assembly line. And India, conversely, is exporting the scalable software and the operating system to run it.
That's a great way to frame it.
Right, like look at the digital technology agreement they just signed. India is formally preparing to share its digital public infrastructure, the DPI model.
The UPI and Aadhaar architecture.
Yes. We are talking about exporting the architecture of UPI, Aadhaar, and DigiLocker to Slovak institutions. We are essentially saying, hey, You have the hardware manufacturing down to a science. Let us integrate our digital operating system to optimize your public service delivery.
That tech stack analogy captures the synergy perfectly, and you can
Right.
actually see that exact same integration happening on the human capital front, too.
Through the labor agreements.
Right. Let's look at the mechanics of the labor migration agreement they signed. Slovakia is integrated into the EU's single labor market, obviously, but they are currently facing severe demographic headwinds.
An aging population.
Aging population and acute labor shortages, particularly in their high-tech and automotive manufacturing sectors. They physically do not have the whipping age population to keep those assembly lines running at maximum capacity.
Which is where we come in.
Exactly. India has a massive surplus of skilled professionals and technicians. So this new agreement doesn't just, vaguely encourage migration. It creates a formalized, secure mobility pathway.
So it protects the workers.
Yes, it ensures Social Security safeguards for Indians working there, meaning they don't lose their pension contributions if they return to India.
But there has to be a broader geopolitical play here beyond just trading tech workers and car parts, right? Because I noticed that Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico made a very public statement backing India for a permanent seat on the UN Security Council.
And that endorsement is diplomatically immense when you consider the source.
Because Fico is a bit of a wild card in Europe.
Exactly. Prime Minister Fico is a highly complex and often controversial figure within the European Union. He has frequently expressed viewpoints that are sympathetic to Russia, which creates a lot of friction within Brussels. Yet he simultaneously maintains Slovakia's firm, binding obligations to NATO and the EU.
Quite the balancing act.
Very much so. So for India to secure a public endorsement for a permanent UNSC seat from a nation sitting at that specific geopolitical intersection, it's a major victory. But the immediate, tangible policy goal here revolves around the Visegrad Group, or the V4.
Right, the V4. That's Slovakia, the Czech Republic, Poland, and Hungary, correct?
Correct. The Visegrad Group operates as a highly influential voting bloc within the broader European Union. When they vote together, they can heavily influence or even veto EU directives.
Well, they have real leverage.
Massive leverage. Now, recall that India signed the India-EU Free Trade Agreement back in January 2026. However, signing an FTA with the European Commission is really only the first hurdle.
Because it needs to be ratified.
Exactly. The actual ratification process requires the parliamentary approval of all 27 individual member states. If even one national parliament rejects it, the entire agreement stalls.
Wow, just one veto kills it.
Just one. Therefore, securing the unwavering support of every single EU member is absolutely vital for New Delhi. By elevating ties with Slovakia to a comprehensive partnership, India is fundamentally locking in a crucial yes vote and securing a vocal advocate within the European Parliament to push that FTA over the finish line.
It's fascinating how a bilateral handshake is actually this multi-layered chess move aimed at Brussels.
Always is.
So, let's follow the diplomatic trail northward. From the heavy assembly lines of Central Europe, Prime Minister Modi headed to the Nordics to meet with Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson.
Right, a very different economic landscape.
Totally. Here, they upgraded ties to a strategic partnership. And the official joint statement kept emphasizing this specific phrase, that the Indian and Swedish economies are complementary, not competing. What does that actually look like in practice?
Well, it requires us to dissect the fundamental structures of both economies. See, Sweden operates a high-wage, extremely high-skill, precision engineering economy. Their national strategy is completely focused on dominating niche, cutting-edge sectors.
Can you give an example?
Sure. For example, they are global leaders in developing green steel, which is steel manufactured using hydrogen instead of coking coal, virtually eliminating carbon emissions.
Oh, that's huge for climate targets.
Massive. They are also heavyweights in producing highly complex active pharmaceutical ingredients, or APIs. India, meanwhile, is driving a high-growth, massive-scale economy. Our ambitions are rooted in vast labor-intensive manufacturing, global IT services, and dominating the generic pharmaceutical market.
Right, the pharmacy of the world.
Exactly. Because the economic engines are tuned to completely different frequencies, they don't cannibalize each other's global export markets. They naturally interlock.
And the corporate integration between the two is already incredibly deep. You have Ericsson, the Swedish telecommunications giant, which is essentially functioning as the physical hardware backbone for India's massive 5G rollout.
Deeply partnered with telecom operators like Bharti Airtel.
Right. And you have Volvo Trucks moving freight across Indian highways, IKEA aggressively expanding its massive retail footprint across Indian megacities.
Yeah.
But reading through the notes, the defense sector is where the stakes jump exponentially.
Yes, defense is the critical component here.
Saab's Gripen fighter jets are aggressively competing for India's future trainer jet and multi-role fighter requirements. And the differentiator seems to be Sweden's offer of highly flexible technology transfer, TOT.
Right. And you have to understand, technology transfer is the absolute holy grail for India's defense establishment.
Why is that so hard to get?
Historically, Western defense suppliers, particularly from the United States or France, are extremely hesitant to share their proprietary source codes or manufacturing blueprints. They want to sell you the finished platform, not the recipe to make it yourself.
They want the recurring revenue.
Exactly. So Sweden's willingness to offer deep, flexible TOT is a massive competitive advantage for them. If an entity like Hindustan Aeronautics Limited can co-manufacture core Gripen components on Indian soil, that permanently elevates India's domestic aerospace industrial base.
That makes total sense.
However, the most strategic long-term element of this entire Nordic relationship actually revolves around critical minerals diplomacy.
Ah, right. The Kiruna discovery.
Precisely. So back in 2022, Sweden announced the discovery of a massive rare earth element deposit in Kiruna, which is located in the far north, way above the Arctic Circle. It is currently assessed as potentially the largest such deposit in all of Europe.
And rare earths are the bottleneck for everything now.
Everything. Now, place that in the context of global supply chains. China currently holds a virtual monopoly on the processing and refining of rare earth elements, which are non-negotiable components for everything from electric vehicle batteries to advanced missile guidance systems.
So it's a massive strategic vulnerability.
Huge. India is a key member of the U.S.-led Mineral Security Partnership, which is a coalition explicitly designed to break that Chinese monopoly. Partnering deeply with Sweden to secure upstream access to the Kiruna deposits perfectly aligns with India's long-term resource security strategy.
Okay, I understand the economic and resource logic entirely, but I really need to challenge the defense integration aspect here because the geopolitical landscape has fundamentally changed.
Boy.
Sweden officially abandoned its historic neutrality and joined NATO in March 2024.
Right.
They are now fully legally integrated into the Western collective security apparatus. If Sweden's defense industry is now entirely entwined with NATO's strategic objectives, doesn't that inherently complicate India's ability to co-manufacture sensitive defense equipment with them?
It absolutely complicates it.
I mean, how does India navigate buying advanced fighter tech from a brand new NATO member without deeply irritating our historical defense partner, Russia?
That is the exact geopolitical tightrope the Ministry of External Affairs is currently walking. You have accurately identified the core friction point here. See, India's entire grand strategy is predicated on the concept of strategic autonomy.
Meaning we don't pick a side.
Right. Maintaining the freedom to partner with anyone based on national interest without being locked into formal alliances. Deepening military-industrial ties with a newly minted NATO member requires immense diplomatic calibration.
I can imagine.
New Delhi has to continuously assure Moscow that a defense partnership with Stockholm is strictly bilateral, focused entirely on domestic capacity building, and in no way represents a quiet alignment with NATO's broader collective security posture against Russia.
And at the exact same time, we can't be seen by Washington or Brussels as trying to pry a new NATO member away from their collective obligations.
Exactly. It is a highly delicate balancing act, but it is a necessary risk for India because the technological dividends are simply too valuable to ignore. And it's not just hardware, by the way. It extends to software and governance.
Oh, really?
Yeah. During these meetings, there was a heavy focus on aligning India's MANAV AI framework with Sweden's ethical AI standards. Securing that kind of technological parity and raw material access, it essentially justifies the diplomatic friction.
Okay, so we see India actively diversifying its strategic portfolio across Europe, securing tech in the north, and manufacturing pathways in the center. But this pursuit of strategic diversification brings us to the absolute core vulnerability of the global economy.
Let me guess. The Middle East.
Yes. Let's pivot from the cold, stable Nordics to the most volatile energy choke point on planet Earth. I want to dissect the sudden, massive diplomatic breakthrough that occurred on June 14th, the announcement of a U.S.-Iran Memorandum of Understanding.
This MOU is a seismic event for global energy markets. And to understand its immediate and future impact, we really have to break down its specific architecture.
Because it's not a full treaty, right?
No, it is not a comprehensive treaty at all. It is a staged bilateral understanding divided into two distinct phases. Phase 1 is designed for immediate de-escalation and economic relief.
Okay, what does phase 1 look like on the ground?
Under this phase, the United States agreed to lift its naval blockade of Iranian ports. Simultaneously, Iran agreed to lift its retaliatory restrictions and harassment of commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz.
Which instantly unblocks global shipping.
Right. Crucially, the U.S. also agreed to suspend partial targeted sanctions on Iranian oil exports and petrochemicals and initiated the release of an estimated $5 to $7 billion in frozen Iranian assets, which are to be staged against Iran's compliance.
And phase 2. Because looking at the terms of phase 1, I mean, it sounds like Iran just received a massive infusion of cash and market access up front without actually surrendering its core nuclear ambitions.
Well, you've hit on the exact controversy surrounding the deal. Phase 2 initiates a highly pressurized 60-day window for what diplomats are calling JCPOA Plus's negotiations.
A 60-day ticking clock.
Exactly. The MOU states that Iran reaffirms its commitment to the Global Non-Proliferation Treaty. However, it explicitly did not require Iran to dismantle its current nuclear enrichment program up front.
So they get to keep spinning the centrifuges for now.
Basically, yes. They are essentially buying 60 days of quiet to negotiate a broader framework where Iran might agree to halt high-level enrichment for 15 to 20 years and allow for heavily enhanced unannounced inspections by the IAEA.
And in exchange?
In exchange, they would receive comprehensive permanent sanctions relief. This phase also importantly includes a deeply fragile ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah forces in Lebanon, which was actually a non-negotiable Iranian demand to even come to the table.
The immediate economic ripple effect on India from this was absolutely staggering. The moment the news of this MOU broke on the terminal screens, Brent crude prices simply plummeted.
Dropped like a stone.
We watched it fall from over $115 a barrel down to $92 a barrel in the span of 24 hours. That represents the largest single-day drop in crude prices since the initial demand shock of the COVID-19 pandemic.
The math is incredible.
It is. The macroeconomic math for India here is wild. For roughly every $10 drop in the global price of oil, India saves between $12 to $14 billion a year on its import bill.
Which completely transforms our fiscal arithmetic.
Naturally, the Indian rupee strengthened massively on the news, jumping from 96.8 to 93.2 against the US dollar. And beyond just oil, with partial sanctions suspended, India's strategic investments in the Chabahar port in Iran can finally operate without the constant looming threat of secondary U.S. sanctions targeting Indian firms. It is an incredible windfall.
It is a profound strategic and economic victory for India, achieved without Indian forces firing a single shot. However, as policy analysts, we must heavily scrutinize the underlying fragility of this moment.
Because it could all fall apart.
Easily. There is a lot of triumphant rhetoric right now about the dawn of a new Middle East. That specific term was originally coined by U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice back in 2006, and it implies a fundamental structural reorganization of regional power.
Like everyone finally getting along.
Right, a region defined by Arab-Israeli normalization, the end of proxy militias, and a non-threatening integrated Iran. This MOU do absolutely none of that. It does not achieve structural change, it merely achieves a tactical pause.
Because the internal politics of the actors involved are still completely unresolved, right?
Precisely. The internal divisions within Iran are cavernous. The pragmatists within the Iranian Foreign Ministry push desperately for this deal to save their collapsing economy, but the hardliners within the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, heavily oppose any capitulation to Washington.
So they might try to sabotage it.
It's very possible. Ultimately, Iran's compliance over these 60 days depends entirely on the shifting calculus of Supreme Leader Khamenei.
And we cannot ignore the glaring objection from Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu was not a party to this bilateral U.S.-Iran deal. His government considers any agreement that leaves Iran with its nuclear enrichment infrastructure intact as a literal existential threat to the state of Israel.
A huge sticking point.
Plus, Saudi Arabia is still holding out on any broader regional normalization until there is a credible, irreversible pathway to Palestinian statehood. So looking at all these tripwires, here's my question. India just saved tens of billions of dollars, our currency stabilized, inflation expectations dropped, our ports opened up. But this entire massive economic windfall is balancing precariously on a 60-day negotiating window.
Yes, it is.
So what happens on day 61 if Iranian and U.S. negotiators sitting in some hotel room in Geneva can't agree on the definition of zero enrichment?
Well, if those talks fail by August 19th, which marks the expiration of the 60-day window, the U.S. naval blockade could resume immediately. The IRGC could instantly recommence harassing tankers in the Strait. Open conflict could reignite overnight.
We'd be right back to square one.
Worse than square one. That is the terrifying, unvarnished reality of deep energy dependency. India's current macroeconomic stability is effectively held hostage to the diplomatic patience of Washington and the internal factional politics of Tehran.
Which directly begs the next massive structural question regarding India's foreign policy. If the Indian economy is so deeply structurally exposed to the flow of traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, why on earth weren't we in the negotiating room?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question.
I mean, when you read the dispatches, Pakistan served as a crucial active mediator throughout these ceasefire negotiations. Oman facilitated the back-channel communications. But India, the world's third largest energy consumer, whose entire inflation rate depends on the outcome, was completely absent from the actual deal-making table.
This is where we must undertake a rigorous critique of the structural realities of Indian diplomacy. It is a fact that India was not a co-mediator, it was not a guarantor of the deal, and it was not a formal party to the negotiations.
So what did we actually do?
India's involvement was largely limited to issuing diplomatic statements urging restraint, attending virtual multilateral meetings, and utilizing back-channel communications to express our concerns. But India did not actively shape the outcome of the MOU.
Why not?
There are deep structural reasons for this absence. First and foremost is India's historical tradition of non-alignment. The core doctrine of strategic autonomy has historically dictated that New Delhi must stay out of the sovereign conflicts of other nations to avoid entangling alliances.
Okay, I have to jump in here, because observing this application of strategic autonomy feels incredibly frustrating. It feels like India is a passenger on a bus driving along a crumbling cliff edge.
Okay, I like this analogy.
Right. We are deeply financially, existentially invested in the bus not crashing. But we stubbornly refuse to walk to the front, push the driver aside, and grab the steering wheel because our tradition says we are just passengers.
We just sit in the back and hope for the best.
Exactly. Meanwhile, our primary geopolitical rival, Pakistan, has walked right up to the front and is actively helping the driver navigate the turns. By playing the active mediator, Pakistan leveraged its historical relationship with the U.S. and its standing within the Islamic world to make itself diplomatically indispensable to Washington.
Your analogy of the bus on the cliff edge perfectly captures the immense frustration felt by many strategic thinkers in New Delhi right now. Pakistan's successful role as a mediator in this crisis rehabilitates its international standing significantly, which is a major, tangible concern for India's regional security.
But surely we have more hard power than Pakistan to leverage.
Well, we also have to acknowledge the hard power realities of the region. India lacks the regional military infrastructure to force its way to the table.
We don't have bases there.
Exactly. The United States, the United Kingdom, France, and Russia all maintain naval bases and significant hard power projection capabilities in the Persian Gulf and the wider Middle East. India possesses highly capable naval assets for anti-piracy operations, like Operation Urja Suraksha in the Arabian Sea, but we do not possess the forward-deployed bases that provide hard coercive security to the region.
So we can't threaten or guarantee anything militarily.
Right. Moreover, our primary energy partners, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, were not directly confronting the U.S. blockade. India cannot realistically adopt a more aggressive diplomatic posture against the United States than its own primary energy suppliers are willing to take.
I understand the constraints, but relying on the goodwill of others to keep our lights on isn't a grand strategy, it's a hope. So what is the core lesson the foreign policy establishment needs to extract from this near miss?
The lesson is that the doctrine of strategic autonomy requires an urgent, modern update. The critical question being debated right now is, does maintaining strict neutrality cost India a seat at the table when the conflict in question directly dictates our domestic inflation rate and food prices?
It seems like the answer is yes.
Increasingly, yes. The emerging geopolitical consensus is that India must officially pivot from a strict neighborhood-first policy to a broader region-first policy. West Asia is no longer our extended neighborhood. It is our immediate strategic environment and demands proactive, interventionist policy attention.
So what does that look like practically?
India needs to articulate a formal Hormuz doctrine. Much like how the United States explicitly defines the freedom of navigation in the South China Sea as a vital national interest, India must formally declare the Strait of Hormuz as an area of supreme Indian national interest.
Making it a red line for us.
Yes. Building a formalized trilateral security consultation mechanism with non-belligerent strategic states like Oman, Qatar, and the UAE could massively amplify our leverage. The goal is ensuring that during the next crisis, and given that 60-day window, there will almost certainly be a next crisis, India is an active participant at the negotiating table, rather than a passive consumer waiting to read about the outcome in the morning papers.
That makes total sense. Now, while India is forced to navigate these intense external geopolitical pressures threatening our energy security and macroeconomic stability, we must simultaneously look inward.
We have to focus on the domestic front.
Right, because the pressures facing our internal societal fabric, specifically regarding our vaunted demographic dividend, are immense and tragically frequently fatal. I want to shift our focus to the Supreme Court's National Task Force, the NTF, and their recently released report on student welfare and suicides.
This is a very heavy but absolutely critical topic.
It is. And the context driving this report is overwhelmingly grim. National Crime Records Bureau, or NCRB, data indicates that over 13,000 students die by suicide annually in India.
13,000! It's devastating.
In specific, hyper-competitive coaching hubs like CODA, we are seeing 25 or more young lives lost in a single calendar year. It has escalated far beyond isolated tragedies. It is a systemic epidemic.
It is a profound and ongoing national tragedy. What the Supreme Court's National Task Force has managed to do in this report is execute a brilliant, overdue, and highly necessary intellectual pivot in how we govern education.
What do you mean by a pivot?
Historically, when a student tragedy occurs in a coaching hub, the immediate reflex of the institution and the local administration is to frame it purely as an individual mental health crisis. The prevailing narrative suggests that the specific student lacked emotional resilience or couldn't handle the syllabus.
Blaming the student, essentially.
Exactly. And the solution offered is almost always reactionary. Hire a counselor for the hostel or put a helpline number on the notice board. The NTF report completely rejects mental health as the sole analytical frame.
So they look at the bigger picture.
Yes. They observed that this level of campus distress is a social, institutional, and systemic design failure requiring structural legislative solutions. They successfully shifted the burden of blame from the frailty of the individual's mind to the immense cruelty of society's design.
Reading through the report, they identified 5 major structural causes.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at how they break them down, it feels like we are finally diagnosing the actual disease rather than just endlessly treating the symptom.
Let's walk through those 5 causes.
Okay. First, they point to single exam gatekeeping. Exams like NEET for medical and GE for engineering are entirely life-determining. You have situations where 23 students are competing for a single viable MBBS seat.
The odds are just brutal.
Right. The stakes are unimaginably high, and a student's entire future is determined by their performance in a single, unyielding 3-hour window. Second, they target the coaching industry itself. We were talking about a 65,000 crore rupee, largely unregulated corporatized machine.
It's an entire parallel education system.
Exactly. The report notes how these institutes normalize 16-hour study days and actively utilize fear, peer comparison, and the pervasive narrative of failure as permanent disgrace as their primary motivational tools for teenagers.
Yeah, and that institutional fear feeds directly into the third structural cause, which is immense parental and societal pressure. For many families, particularly first-generation aspirants from lower middle-class backgrounds, investing in these coaching institutes requires liquidating life savings or taking predatory loans.
So the financial guilt is piled onto the student.
The burden on the student is doubled. The narrative enforced within many communities is that failing to clear G or NEET doesn't just mean a change in career plans. It brings social shame upon the entire extended family.
Which leads to the fourth cause, right?
Yes. Fourth, the NTF highlights the total absence of alternative pathways. Our higher education system is designed almost exclusively as a credential gatekeeping mechanism with absolutely no graceful exit ramps.
It's all or nothing.
If a student fails to clear that single exam, the system presents them with no dignified, viable alternative career path. They are simply labeled as failures. And finally, the fifth cause is the dismal state of institutional infrastructure.
Like the hostels and living conditions?
Exactly. Students migrate to these coaching hubs and are packed into entirely unregulated, hyper-dense hostels. They suffer from terrible nutrition, chronic sleep deprivation, and severe social isolation, removed from their familial support structures. The physical and emotional environment is actively hostile to human flourishing.
You know, when you lay out those 5 causes, the current educational setup looks exactly like a massive pressure cooker where the release valve has been purposefully welded shut.
That's incredibly accurate.
Providing a couple of part-time counselors in a 5,000-student coaching center is the equivalent of just wiping the steam off the outside of the pot, while completely ignoring the fact that the pressure inside is building to a catastrophic, explosive level. The NTF is finally telling the government that we need to turn down the heat underneath the pot and fundamentally redesign the lid to build actual structural release valves.
That analogy perfectly encapsulates the NTF's regulatory philosophy. If we evaluate this through a constitutional lens, this connects directly to the Supreme Court's progressive and consistent expansion of Article 21, the right to life.
How so?
Over the decades, the court has ruled that the right to life is not merely the right to animal existence, it includes the right to live with dignity. The NTF is implicitly arguing that a hyper-pressurized, unregulated educational environment that predictably drives adolescents to self-harm is a violation of that dignified life.
That's a profound legal argument.
It is. Their approach aligns perfectly with the World Health Organization's socio-ecological model of suicide prevention. The WHO dictates that you cannot prevent suicide solely by intervening at the individual clinical level. You must simultaneously address the relationship, community, and broad societal risk factors that drive the despair in the first place.
And the recommendations they offer to address those societal factors are highly actionable. They're demanding mandatory statutory registration and strict minimum welfare standards for all coaching institutes.
Finally, regulating the industry.
Regulating everything from diet and hostel square footage to mandatory student-to-counselor ratios. They are calling for an absolute ban on fear-based marketing that promises guaranteed ranks. Furthermore, they are pushing for a national peer support program.
That's an interesting approach.
Yeah, instead of just relying on clinical professionals, they want to train students as peer counselors to dramatically reduce the stigma of a teenager asking for help. But the most vital recommendation is diversifying the examination pathways themselves.
Changing the tests.
They suggest introducing multiple attempt formats for exams like NEAT, incorporating standard board scores to reduce the do-or-die nature of a single test, and building credit-based alternative degrees. The urgency here is undeniable, especially considering the massive crises we just witnessed with the NEAT paper leaks in both 2024 and 2026. The entire governance ecosystem surrounding these examinations is demonstrably failing our youth.
It is a systemic failure of governance. The NTF also strongly recommended integrating and promoting the I Call Mental Health Helpline, which is run by the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, establishing it as a primary, accessible first response mechanism across all educational institutions.
That's a great practical step.
However, if we step back, this systemic crisis among our youth reveals a much deeper, fundamental breakdown in how we support one another as a collective society. The hyper-competition and isolation in our education system point to a broader decay in the social glue that is supposed to hold our nation together.
The sense of community.
Yes. And that decay brings us directly to a core ideal embedded right in the preamble of the Indian Constitution, the concept of fraternity.
That is a perfect transition to our next topic. The notes dive deeply into the argument that constitutional fraternity, not just harsher police action or more stringent court orders, is the only sustainable mechanism to combat the rising tide of hate speech, communal divides, and what we are calling algorithmic polarization.
It's becoming a massive issue.
Right. To ground this, the context provided references the severe communal tensions we saw throughout 2025 and 2026, encompassing events like Operation Sindoor and various localized but highly volatile clashes across different states.
To truly comprehend the legal and social weight of fraternity, we must return to the foundational text, the Constituent Assembly debates. On November 25, 1949, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar delivered a profoundly important speech outlining the core philosophy of the Constitution.
What was his view on it?
He envisioned fraternity not just as a polite social norm, but as the wholeness of life. In our preamble, we the people resolve to secure justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. It is vital to note that fraternity is listed last.
Because it's the culmination of the others.
Exactly. It is not an afterthought. It is the ultimate necessary synthesis of the preceding three. Justice provides the structural, institutional fairness. Liberty secures individual freedom from state overreach. Equality guarantees distributional fairness and non-discrimination.
But without fraternity.
Ambedkar warned that without fraternity, the relational dimension, the innate sense of common brotherhood among citizens, justice, liberty, and equality remain merely mechanical, legalistic concepts. They require a massive enforcement apparatus to function. They cannot become a natural, self-sustaining course of life without the emotional and social bond of fraternity holding the society together.
The source material provides a brilliant breakdown of exactly why this constitutional fraternity is eroding so rapidly in the modern era. The primary driver identified is social media and algorithmic polarization.
The algorithms feed on anger.
Yes, the underlying architecture of these platforms is designed to financially reward and amplify outrage, anger, and tribal identity. They algorithmically accelerate the creation of communal information silos. An individual can spend hours online and only ever encounter highly curated, inflammatory views that perfectly reinforce their existing prejudices against another community while completely demonizing the other side.
It creates alternate realities.
Then you layer on the political instrumentalization of identity. When political entities realize that mobilizing religious, linguistic, or caste identities yield immediate, highly effective short-term electoral rewards, the long-term, painstaking work of fraternity building is discarded as politically useless. Add to that the very real economic anxieties surrounding job scarcity in a vast population, and communal scapegoating quickly becomes an easy release valve for legitimate economic frustration.
Furthermore, the erosion accelerates when state institutions, the local police, the municipal administration, are perceived to fail to act impartially during communal incidents. When state impunity exists, it emboldens bad actors and shatters trust between communities.
So what does the Constitution say we should do about it?
Now, from a strictly constitutional perspective, under Article 51A, it is an explicit fundamental duty of every citizen to promote harmony and the spirit of common brotherhood amongst all the people of India, transcending religious, linguistic, and regional diversities.
But the governance problem is, how does a state actually enforce a duty of brotherhood?
That's the challenge. Currently, the state relies heavily on the Indian Penal Code, specifically Sections 153 and 295A, which criminalize the promotion of enmity between different groups and the outraging of religious feelings.
But those are basically hammers.
Exactly. These laws act as incredibly blunt instruments. They were drafted in the 19th century and are entirely inadequate for policing the era of decentralized, algorithmic, viral outrage. The solution to an erosion of fraternity cannot purely be punitive. It requires mobilizing civil society, empowering local gram sabhas to resolve disputes, actively fostering interfaith dialogue platforms, and implementing an educational curriculum that emphasizes India's deeply shared historical heritage and syncretic traditions rather than fixating on historical communal differences.
Okay, I have to push back on this entire premise.
Go ahead.
I understand the philosophical beauty of Ambedkar's vision. But as a practical matter of governance, justice, liberty, and equality are concepts that can be explicitly legislated. They can be rigidly enforced by a court order. If a state institution denies me equality based on my caste, I can file a writ petition, and a judge can compel them to hire me. If my liberty is infringed without due process, habeas corpus protects me. But how do you legally mandate brotherhood? Isn't the entire concept of fraternity just too abstract, too inherently emotional to function as a tangible tool of state policy? You cannot arrest a citizen simply for not feeling warm and fraternal toward their neighbor.
That is the enduring structural challenge of the entire constitutional project. Your critique is entirely valid. The state cannot legislate a human emotion. A judge cannot issue an injunction demanding that citizens love one another.
So what's the point of it?
What the state can do, and what the Constitution demands it must do, is legislate and actively design the institutions and public spaces where that emotion has the opportunity to be fostered.
Like urban planning.
Exactly. You can design urban planning policies that physically force cross-community interaction in public parks and transit hubs, rather than allowing cities to self-segregate into communal ghettos. You can mandate educational curricula that actively dismantle prejudices through exposure to diverse literature and history. The goal of constitutional fraternity isn't about the state forcing people to become best friends. It is about establishing a non-negotiable societal baseline where the inherent dignity of the other is recognized and respected as entirely equal to your own. And to tie this back to our macroeconomic discussion, a stable, harmonious society where communities trust one another is the absolute foundational prerequisite for sustained economic growth.
Because capital hates instability.
Capital inherently flees from conflict and instability. And knowing that social stability attracts money brings us perfectly to how the finance ministry is attempting to capitalize on the recent geopolitical stabilization to draw massive foreign wealth into India.
That is a brilliant bridge. Let's examine exactly what the finance ministry is doing. On June 15th, right on the heels of the U.S.-Iran MO announcement, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman announced that a massive pipeline of new financial measures is on the anvil, designed specifically to attract foreign capital.
She is moving fast.
She is clearly striking while the iron is hot, aiming to aggressively capitalize on the massive macroeconomic tailwinds generated by the stabilization of the Hormuz choke point. And the financial markets reacted with absolute euphoria.
The markets loved it.
The BSE Sensex surged by a staggering 1,850 points, which marks the largest single-day gain we've seen in the entire year of 2026. The economic fundamentals suddenly look incredibly bright. We are staring at significantly lower imported inflation because the oil price dropped, and a rapidly narrowing current account deficit because our import bill just shrank by billions.
The finance minister is moving with such speed and aggression right now because the preceding financial year was incredibly challenging on the capital front.
Really, how bad was it?
We need to look at the baseline data to understand her urgency. In the fiscal year 2026, India witnessed historical outflows of foreign portfolio investment, or FPI. Foreign investors pulled a staggering 1.78 lakh crore rupees out of the Indian equity and debt markets.
Whoa.
And while the gross foreign direct investment, FDI, figures looked impressive at over $94 billion, when you account for repatriation and disinvestment, the net FDI inflow was a mere $7.65 billion. That's a significant drop from previous years. The government desperately needs to reverse this trend and lock in foreign capital while the geopolitical risk premium is momentarily low.
And reading through the proposed policy interventions, they are highly targeted and technical. First, the ministry is looking at significantly relaxing the FPI investment limits in Indian government securities, specifically by expanding what they call the fully accessible route, or FR bonds.
Opening up the debt market.
Second, they're proposing an easing of the external commercial borrowings, the ECB norms. This effectively makes it much cheaper and easier for massive Indian corporations to borrow money internationally to fund their domestic expansion.
Makes sense.
Third, they are aggressively targeting the diaspora by expanding the FCNRB schemes, the foreign currency non-resident bank accounts. They are proposing offering interest rates as high as 8 to 9.5% to incentivize non-resident Indians to park their foreign currency savings in Indian banks.
That's a very attractive rate.
Finally, they're promising a major simplification of the FDI approval routes, specifically aiming to reduce red tape in sensitive high-tech sectors.
For anyone analyzing macroeconomic policy, it is absolutely vital to understand the critical distinction the government is navigating here between FPI and FDI. They are entirely different beasts.
Right. Hot money versus sticky money.
Exactly. FPI is widely known as hot money. It is highly liquid, sentiment-driven capital. It flows into stocks and government bonds seeking quick returns, and it can leave the country at the literal click of a button if global sentiment sours or if U.S. interest rates rise.
Which is what happened last year.
Yes. FDI, on the other hand, is durable, sticky money. It is the capital that actually builds physical factories, transfers intellectual property, and creates long-term employment. The finance minister's strategy right now is a two-pronged attack to capture both.
And they have a massive catalyst for FPI right now.
A huge one. A massive catalyst driving the FPI side of the equation is India's recent inclusion in the JP Morgan GBIEM Global Diversified Index, which began tracking in June 2024. Just being listed on that index triggers billions of dollars in passive algorithmic bond inflows from global mutual funds.
No, they just automatically buy our bonds.
Automatically. Analysts project that once India reaches its full 10% weight in that index, we are looking at $25 billion or more in entirely passive automatic inflows into our bond market. Furthermore, because the global oil price has plummeted, the Indian government is looking at unexpected fiscal relief of up to 30,000 to 40,000 crore rupees in fertilizer and fuel subsidy savings.
Plus the RBI dividend.
Exactly. When you combine those massive subsidy savings with the historic 2.86 lakh crore rupee dividend that the Reserve Bank of India just transferred to the government, India's sovereign fiscal space for infrastructure spending in the coming year looks incredibly robust.
But hold on, let me ask about the inherent danger of this strategy, specifically regarding the government bond market and this hot money.
Sure.
If the finance ministry actively invites unlimited, massive amounts of foreign portfolio investment into our sovereign debt through this FR route, aren't we essentially setting a trap for ourselves? By relying on foreign capital to fund our government borrowing, aren't we just handing foreign investors the power to crash the Indian rupee and spike our bond yields if they suddenly decide to pull their money out during the next global panic?
Yeah.
We literally just saw how painful that is with the 1.78 lakh crore outflow last year.
Your concern is perfectly valid, and it points to the classic double-edged sword of creating deep government securities, or GSEC, markets. On one hand, India needs massive foreign participation to create deep liquidity, which fundamentally lowers the borrowing costs for the government to build roads and railways.
But the risk.
But you are absolutely right. Excessive foreign ownership of sovereign debt introduces massive contagion risk. It means that a sudden banking crisis in the United States or a property crash in China could cause global investors to liquidate their Indian government bonds in a panic, pulling billions of dollars out of the Indian economy overnight and crushing the rupee's value.
So why take the risk?
The RBI and the Finance Ministry are essentially placing a massive macroeconomic bet. They are betting that India's underlying economic fundamentals, our growth rate, our foreign exchange reserves, are strong enough to withstand that imported volatility. But they are rushing to lock in these capital flows immediately, precisely because they know the window of opportunity is incredibly fragile.
Going back to the Middle East.
Exactly. And the source of that fragility comes directly from how the U.S.-Iran diplomatic deal was negotiated in the first place.
Which brings us perfectly to an analysis of the art of the deal and Trump's specific brand of diplomacy. The source material provides a fascinating framework, analyzing this U.S.-Iran MOU directly through the lens of Donald Trump's famous 1987 business playbook, The Art of the Deal.
It's a very unique diplomatic style.
When you map his actions against the book's advice, the strategy is highly recognizable. You apply maximum excruciating pressure, you manufacture a sense of absolute imminent crisis, you accept a partial, highly flawed win that doesn't actually solve the core structural issue, and then you step up to the podium and declare a total historic victory for the cameras.
It represents a profound, highly disruptive shift in diplomatic methodology. If you contrast this with the previous diplomatic architecture, the JCPOA, commonly known as the Iran nuclear deal, that was a painstakingly negotiated multilateral framework agreed upon by the P5+1 nations.
Very institutional.
Highly institutional. It contained rigorous, institutionalized, and highly technical verification mechanisms overseen by the IAEA. What we are witnessing now is a reversion to a highly personalized, erratic bilateral MOU approach. The Trump administration escalated the situation to the absolute brink of regional war with the naval blockades, created maximum possible leverage, and then abruptly offered a partial face-saving deal.
But the deal is full of holes.
Massive holes. When you analyze the actual text of the agreement, the twists or the unresolved loopholes are glaring. There are 6 major unexploded landmines within this deal that make it incredibly precarious for global stability.
Right, let's detail those 6 specific issues because they prove why this 60-day window is so dangerous.
Go for it.
Issue 1. Iran explicitly retained its nuclear enrichment capability. The core threat wasn't neutralized. The upcoming 60-day window now has to somehow figure out what to do with Iran's existing stockpile of 60% highly enriched uranium.
Which is basically weapons grade.
Exactly. Issue 2. The sanctions relief is strictly conditional. The U.S. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, didn't issue a blanket waiver. They still have to issue specific individual licenses for every single financial transaction, meaning they can choke the flow of money at any second.
Very precarious.
Issue 3. The release of the $5 to $7 billion in frozen assets is staged over time, not immediate, requiring constant verification. Issue 4. The Lebanon ceasefire is incredibly fragile. The IRGC and Hezbollah possess their own decentralized operational autonomy. Tehran cannot entirely control a rogue Hezbollah commander who decides to fire a rocket into northern Israel.
That could derail everything instantly.
Issue 5. The MOU completely ignores Iran's advanced ballistic missile program, which is a massive threat to the Gulf states, but which Iran categorically refuses to negotiate. And finally, Issue 6. The deal doesn't even touch upon Iran's vast network of regional proxies, like the Houthis in Yemen who control the Red Sea access, or Hamas in Gaza.
Exactly. When you lay bare those 6 unresolved vectors of conflict, the strategic lesson for India's foreign policy establishment is incredibly stark. Do not trust bilateral volatility. A personalized handshake MOU can be ripped up and discarded just as easily and quickly as it was signed.
We can't build an economy on a handshake.
We absolutely cannot. India's fundamental energy security and economic stability cannot depend on the erratic whims of domestic U.S. politics or factional Iranian infighting. The unyielding mandate for New Delhi right now is to utilize this brief window of low oil prices to aggressively accelerate energy diversification.
What does that entail?
We must immediately increase our sourcing from reliable partners like Oman, expand long-term contracts for U.S. and Qatari LNG, secure Russian crude supplies, and most importantly, rapidly scale our domestic renewable energy capacity. We must act as if the Strait of Hormuz could close again tomorrow, regardless of the fact that it's currently open.
You know, I look at this specific style of high-stakes bilateral diplomacy, and it powerfully reminds me of a negligent landlord who just paints over a massive, expanding crack in a load-bearing wall.
Oh, that's a good one.
The first coat of paint looks absolutely fantastic for the press conference today. Everyone applauds the clean wall. But structurally, the foundation is still sinking. Nothing has actually been repaired, and the entire house remains in immense danger of catastrophic collapse at any given moment.
That is a very apt, sobering metaphor for the current state of Middle Eastern geopolitics. But, as analysts, we must also acknowledge the immediate, tangible reality on the ground. Despite the massive geopolitical cracks in the wall, the physical naval blockade has been lifted. The global economic machinery is slowly grinding back into motion, and we can literally track the physical proof of that relief floating toward the western coast of India right now.
Yes. That brings us to the transit of the LNG tanker Disha. On June 15th, this massive vessel successfully cleared the Strait of Hormuz, becoming the very first Indian-bound ship to exit the Persian Gulf in roughly 75 days.
75 days is a long time for that route to be blocked.
It's an eternity in energy markets. The logistics behind it highlight our infrastructure. The vessel is managed by a consortium led by the state-owned Shipping Corporation of India, and it was chartered by Petronet LNG. It is currently carrying an immense cargo of 62,370 metric tons of Qatari liquefied natural gas, loaded at the Ras Laffan facility, and it is steaming straight for the Dahej regasification terminal in Gujarat.
Tracking the transit of the Disha is vital because it serves both a highly symbolic and a deeply material purpose. Symbolically, it proves to the global shipping insurance markets that the U.S.-Iran MOU is actually operational at sea, not just on paper.
Ships can actually sail safely.
Right. But materially, we need to profoundly understand the real-world cascading economic impact of that 75-day Hormuz closure on India's internal supply chains. India's energy logistics were stretched to the absolute breaking point.
How close did we get to running out?
Very close. We must remember that institutions like Petronet LNG are not just energy companies, they operate critical national infrastructure. The LNG we import through those terminals isn't merely burned for electricity. It is the absolute primary chemical feedstock required for our massive fertilizer plants.
Right, for agriculture.
Exactly. During the 75-day closure, major urea manufacturing plants at Vijaypur and Hazira were forced to drastically cut their daily output by 20 to 30% because they couldn't secure gas. That directly threatens the upcoming agricultural sowing season. Furthermore, city gas distribution networks saw the prices for CNG spike dangerously in metropolitan areas like Delhi and Mumbai.
And the industrial impact.
It was severe. Industrial manufacturers who were suddenly cut off from gas had to immediately switch to burning highly polluting diesel to keep their kilns running, which drove up overall national fuel demand and worsened air quality.
And when you look at the national inventory data from during the blockade, it is genuinely terrifying. As of June 16, reports indicated that the massive Dahej terminal had only about 2.1 days of LNG inventory left in its cryogenic tanks.
2 days. We were on the brink.
The Disha's incoming cargo of 62,370 metric tons represents roughly 4 to 5 days of India's total national LNG consumption. It is a literal lifeline arriving at the absolute last possible moment.
But let me ask you about the logistics of the recovery. The reports indicate that there is a massive traffic jam of over 100 supertankers waiting at anchor at both ends of the Strait of Hormuz.
Naturally, after a 75-day blockage.
And major global tanker operators like Hafnia are publicly demanding verified physical security guarantees from naval forces before they are willing to send their billion-dollar fleets through the choke point. So, is the successful transit of the Dusha just a lucky outlier, or are we witnessing a true systemic return to normal global shipping? The Dusha acts as a pathfinder vessel, testing the waters, but a return to normalized high-volume shipping will take several weeks to fully resume. Commercial tanker operators require comprehensive maritime insurance to sail, and those insurance syndicates in London require verifiable physical security on the water, not merely a political MOU signed in Geneva.
So it's going to be a slow ramp up.
Yes. From a strategic UPSC perspective, this entire crisis forcefully exposes a glaring, critical vulnerability in India's energy security metrics. The blockade revealed that India was operating on an incredibly thin margin of error, just about 10 days of crude oil cover in our strategic petroleum reserves, and a horrifyingly low 2 days of LNG stock at our active terminals.
That's way below standard, isn't it?
Far below the internationally recommended minimums of 90 days. Securing robust, diversified energy supply lines and building massive domestic storage capacity is only step one of our national development. Because the real, long-term existential challenge is how we intelligently utilize that secured energy to power, manage, and cool our rapidly expanding megacities over the next quarter century.
Which provides the perfect logical transition to analyzing the Delhi Master Plan 2047. The Delhi Development Authority, the DDA, is proposing a major visionary shift in how the capital is managed. They want to officially extend the horizon of the current spatial planning document from the year 2041 all the way out to 2047.
Aligning it with the national centenary.
Right. The stated political goal here is to align Delhi's urban development trajectory with the national government's Viksit Bharat at 2047 vision, which will mark the centenary of India's independence as a developed nation.
To appreciate the immense scale and complexity of this proposal, we first must precisely understand what a master plan legally represents. It is not just a suggestion, it is a statutory, legally binding spatial planning document.
It dictates what can be built where.
Exactly. It is the fundamental blueprint that legally dictates every square inch of land use in the territory, zoning where the residential colonies are permitted, where the highly polluting industrial zones are restricted, mandating the density of populations per square kilometer, and reserving corridors for future mass transit networks.
And Delhi has had several of these.
Yes, Delhi has historically operated on a series of these plans, enacted for 1962, 2001, 2021, and the currently operational 2041 plan. But the demographic projections driving the 2047 extension are simply staggering. Demographers expect Delhi's urban agglomeration to reach between 35 to 38 million people by 2047.
38 million people in one city.
Planning the housing, ensuring the water security, and managing the solid waste for a metropolis of that unprecedented size requires profound, almost predictive foresight.
The specific urban planning concepts they are looking to aggressively integrate are fascinating. You have a heavy emphasis on transit-oriented development, or TOD. The core idea of TOD is building extremely high-density, mixed-use commercial and residential zones immediately surrounding metro stations, the goal being to drastically reduce the population's daily dependency on private cars.
Making it a walkable, transit-first city.
To achieve this, they're proposing adjusting the floor area ratio, the FAR, which essentially dictates how high developers are legally permitted to build vertically. They are also actively planning for a formalized nighttime economy through specific deregulated zoning, legally allowing 24-hour retail, logistics, and restaurants to operate, spreading the city's economic activity around the clock to reduce peak congestion.
That's a huge shift in urban culture.
And they're even proposing dedicated urban agriculture zones, encouraging the utilization of massive flat rooftops for hydroponics to aid in microclimate cooling.
While the economic concepts are innovative, the climate resilience aspect of the 2047 plan is undoubtedly its most critical existential feature. When you look at the reality of Delhi routinely experiencing 48 degrees Celsius days during the summer, combined with the devastating multi-crore economic damage caused by the Yamuna floods of 2023, spatial planning ceases to be an academic exercise. It becomes a matter of raw civic survival.
Protecting the natural geography.
Yes, strictly protecting the Yamuna ozone, the natural floodplain, from any further concrete encroachment isn't just an aesthetic choice to preserve greenery, it is functional necessary to allow the river to safely swell during monsoons without catastrophically flooding the city center. This entire planning process ties directly into the broader debate surrounding urban governance and the execution of the 74th Constitutional Amendment, which explicitly mandates that urban planning should be localized and democratic, driven by municipal bodies rather than central bureaucratic authorities like the DDA.
But let me strongly challenge the actual ambition of this document.
Go on.
It is very easy for bureaucrats to sit in an air-conditioned office, draw beautiful, color-coded, high-density, transit-oriented development zones and serene green agricultural spaces on a digital map, and confidently label it Vision 2047. But how do you practically, physically retrofit a city that is already chaotically built up, massively congested, legally complex, and severely water-stressed today?
It's the ultimate planner's dilemma.
You cannot simply send bulldozers to flatten unauthorized colonies housing millions of people just to build a perfectly planned green TOD zone. The friction between the plan and reality seems insurmountable.
You have hit upon the fundamental, defining crisis of Indian urban planning. Statutory master plans in India very often devolve into aspirational utopian documents rather than serving as practical step-by-step retrofit guides for municipal engineers.
Because implementing it is a nightmare.
Implementing a concept like TOD in a densely packed existing neighborhood is incredibly difficult. It requires complex legal mechanisms like land pooling, where you must incentivize dozens of fractured current landowners to voluntarily surrender their plots to allow for unified vertical redevelopment. Furthermore, it requires massive, extremely disruptive upgrades to the invisible infrastructure,
like sewage and water.
the underground sewage lines and water mains, before you can even begin to build vertically. The immense tension between ideal, map-based urban development and the chaotic, entrenched reality of nature and existing settlements plays out every single day in the capital. And we see this systemic conflict acutely and sometimes with fatal consequences during the violent pre-monsoon storms.
Exactly. That perfectly illustrates our next point regarding the Forest Department's new orders concerning dangerous trees. During the severe pre-monsoon dust storms that battered Delhi in May and June, the city witnessed several deadly incidents where massive, weakened, or fundamentally compromised trees violently collapsed onto roads, crushing cars and tragically killing pedestrians.
It was a horrific few weeks for the city.
This immediate public safety crisis triggered a massive, highly complex bureaucratic turf war over who actually possessed the legal authority to rapidly cut down or heavily trim a demonstrably dangerous tree.
The root cause of this resulting bureaucratic nightmare is the Delhi Preservation of Trees Act, commonly known as the DPTA, enacted in 1994.
What does the act actually say?
In its original intent, it is a very strict, highly commendable environmental law. It legally mandates that absolutely no individual or government agency can cut, fell, or even heavily trim a tree within the territory of Delhi without first securing the explicit written permission of a designated centralized tree officer.
Which sounds good on paper to stop developers from cutting down the forest.
The clear intention was to aggressively halt the rampant deforestation of the capital's green cover by real estate developers. But in practical daily application, it created a paralyzed, fear-driven system. Even if a massive tree was visibly rotting and leaning precariously over a busy intersection, civic agencies like the DDA, the Municipal Corporation of Delhi, or the Public Works Department felt legally paralyzed. They refused to touch it without formal written permission, fearing prosecution under the DPTA, causing fatal delays in emergency response.
The new order issued by the Forest Department attempts to untangle this legal mess by classifying trees into distinct, actionable categories. You now have emergency hazardous trees, where agencies like the PWD or MCD are finally empowered to act immediately to clear the danger and save lives, with the caveat that they must retroactively inform the tree officer within 24 hours.
Which is much more pragmatic.
Then you have standard categories for planned removal, due to construction and maintenance trimming. The Forest Department is even launching a fascinating pilot project, utilizing drone-based photogrammetry and LiDAR to comprehensively map the health of the city's upper canopy, aiming to identify structurally compromised, rotting trees before they physically fall.
That's a great use of technology.
Honestly, reading through the jurisdiction mess created by the DPTA, it sounds exactly like having 3 different specialist doctors standing around in a hospital emergency room loudly arguing over who has the correct paperwork and hospital protocols, while the patient lying on the table is actively dying of a heart attack.
It is a grim analogy, but unfortunately, a highly accurate description of fragmented Indian civic administration. When analyzing this for policy exams, this scenario perfectly illustrates a classic governance issue, the deep fragmentation of urban environmental governance. Delhi boasts an estimated 3.35 crore trees.
3.35 crore.
This massive canopy is not just decorative, it is absolutely essential ecological infrastructure. It is the only thing reducing the deadly urban heat island effect and absorbing the city's immense particulate air pollution. The ultimate governance challenge here is finding the precise legal balance between aggressively preserving that essential ecological infrastructure from rampant urbanization while simultaneously ensuring immediate public safety in an era of increasingly violent climate-changed weather. And frankly, the localized struggle of municipal agencies to manage a single city's tree canopy is truly just a micro-reflection of the macro-existential battle humanity faces to stabilize our entire planetary ecosystem.
Which takes us to the most sobering data of the day. The Planetary Climate Vital Signs Report 2026. This is a massive, incredibly dense scientific assessment published by a consortium of 14 leading global institutions, including NASA, the European Space Agency, and crucially, India's own IITM Pune.
The data in there is terrifying.
The data presented here is frankly terrifying. The report officially confirms that 2025 was the hottest year on recorded human history, with the global mean surface temperature breaching 1.62 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial baseline.
We blew right past 1.5.
We are looking at compounding catastrophes. Record low Antarctic sea ice extent, the global oceans absorbing an unprecedented 90% of the Earth's excess trapped heat, the Greenland ice sheet melting at an astonishing rate of 267 gigatons a year, and extreme weather events causing a documented $380 billion in direct economic losses globally in a single year.
To properly contextualize this data, we must analyze it through the scientific framework of planetary boundaries, which identifies the 9 critical thresholds that define the safe operating space for human civilization. Breaching the 1.62 degrees Celsius mark implies we are rapidly moving outside that safe, stable Holocene environment.
What did the report say specifically about India?
The India-specific signals buried within this report are particularly alarming for our domestic stability. Our monsoon variability is drastically increasing. The forecast for 2026 predicts rainfall at roughly 90% of the long-period average, pushing us toward drought conditions. The average temperature across the Indian subcontinent has officially risen by 0.63 degrees Celsius since the year 1900.
0.63 doesn't sound like a lot globally.
While that absolute number sounds much smaller than the global average, for a tropical country whose agricultural workforce already exists near the physiological limits of human heat stress, a 0.63-degree rise is devastating. Furthermore, our Himalayan glaciers, often referred to as the water towers of Asia because they feed the Ganges, Indus, and Brahmaputra river systems, are currently losing between 5 to 6% of their total ice volume every single decade,
threatening the water supply for hundreds of millions.
And simultaneously, sea levels in the Bay of Bengal are rising at a rate faster than the global average, threatening millions of coastal citizens.
Now, India is not ignoring this. We do have our formal nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, submitted under the Paris Agreement. We have legally committed to a 45% reduction in our economy's emissions intensity by the year 2030. We are aiming for 50% of our installed electric power capacity to be derived from non-fossil fuel sources by 2030, and we have the ultimate grand target of reaching net zero carbon emissions by 2070.
Those are ambitious targets.
But I have to ask the incredibly grim underlying question based on the undeniable math of this report. If we have already hit 1.62 degrees Celsius, meaning we have actually breached the central 1.5 degree Paris Agreement threshold for 2 consecutive years now, have we effectively already lost the primary defining goal of modern global climate diplomacy? Is the dream of 1.5 degrees officially dead?
From a strict, long-term climatological perspective, a temporary breach of 1.5 degrees for a year or two during an El Niño cycle doesn't definitively mean the permanent multi-decade baseline has been irreversibly lost.
But
practically, economically, and politically, yes, the consensus is that the window to keep the long-term average safely below 1.5 degrees has almost certainly closed. The physical infrastructure locking in future emissions is too vast. Therefore, the immediate focus of Indian climate diplomacy and domestic economic planning must urgently, radically shift from a pure focus on mitigation, trying to stop the warming, to massive localized adaptation, building the infrastructure to survive the warming that is already locked into the system.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today, dealing with massive macro theories, from the physics of climate science and the intricacies of global energy diplomacy, down to the granular details of municipal-urban planning. Now, we need to cast our attention of the specific facts that drive these massive trends.
Time for the prelims focus.
Let's engage in a rapid-fire conversational review of specific items that are currently highly relevant for policy and examination focus, and see how they connect to the broader board we just built.
Excellent. The key to mastering these distinct facts is never viewing them in isolation. Let's weave them back into the larger geopolitical and environmental themes we've just spent the hour discussing. First, let's look at the order of the white double crosses.
Right. This is the absolute highest state honor awarded by the Republic of Slovakia, and it was just bestowed upon Prime Minister Modi by the Slovak president, Peter Pellegrini. The name is derived from the prominent double cross featured on their national flag, which sits on a blue hill with 3 red peaks.
It serves as a highly visible diplomatic capstone to the comprehensive partnership and the 11 agreements we dissected at the very beginning of our discussion. It solidifies that crucial Visegrad group connection.
Precisely. Now, let's pivot from European diplomacy back to the environmental conflicts we discussed regarding infrastructure. Consider the Great Indian Bustard, or the jib.
Scientifically classified as Artiotus negriceps.
Right. It is currently listed as critically endangered under the IUCN Red List, with only a tragic remnant population of about 150 individuals left, primarily concentrated in the arid regions of Rajasthan and Gujarat.
And the major immediate threat to their survival isn't traditional poaching, it is collisions with high-tension power lines. The Supreme Court has had to actively intervene, issuing complex orders regarding the undergrounding of these power lines in core jib habitats.
There's a tragic irony.
Notice the profound policy conflict here. The massive electrical infrastructure we desperately need to transmit renewable wind and solar energy, the very infrastructure required to meet our Paris Agreement NDCs, is directly threatening the survival of a critically endangered native species. It is a perfect, localized example of the complex environmental trade-offs inherent in climate adaptation.
And speaking of that renewable energy infrastructure, that connects perfectly to the recent launch of the WT Merit portal. Merit translates to wind in Sanskrit. This is a newly launched, centralized digital portal created by the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy.
To manage the supply chain.
Its primary function is the real-time tracking and management of the extremely complex wind turbine supply chain. India has set a massive, ambitious national target of installing 140 gigawatts of wind energy capacity by 2032. However, chronic supply chain bottlenecks, particularly in sourcing the specialized components required for offshore wind farms, have been a major hurdle. The WT Merit portal aims to introduce transparency and clear those bottlenecks, accelerating the build-out of the grid that, ironically, threatens the tab.
Exactly, it's all interconnected. Now let's move from domestic energy to international technological governance. We noted the 52nd G7 summit, which was held in Evian-les-Bains, France. India attended the summit as an invited partner nation, not as a core member.
And what was our main play there?
The most significant strategic takeaway for India at this summit was the formal presentation of the AMAV AI framework to the G7 leaders. This initiative ties perfectly back to our earlier discussion regarding the India-Sweden strategic partnership. India is actively utilizing platforms like the G7 and bilateral ties with tech-heavy nations like Sweden to aggressively position itself as a global leader in designing ethical, secure, and democratic AI governance structures, ensuring we are rule makers, not rule takers, in the next technological revolution.
Let's shift gears entirely to a piece of ancient history that constantly intersects with modern diplomacy, the dancing girl of Mohenjo-Daro. This is a stunning 4,500-year-old bronze figurine discovered in the ruins of the Indus Valley civilization. She's incredibly famous in art history for her Tripanga pose, that relaxed, confident three-bend posture.
And technologically, she is significant because she was cast using the highly advanced Cire Perdue, or the lost wax casting technique.
Right. She is frequently in the news today due to ongoing, highly politicized repatriation debates, with elements in Pakistan occasionally claiming ownership, although India legally holds the artifact through established pre-partition archaeological excavation protocols. It shows how ancient heritage is utilized in modern nation-building narratives.
Moving from ancient history to immediate public health, we have the critical issue of dengue vaccines. Two primary candidates are currently dominating the news cycle. First is Butantan DV, developed in Brazil, which was recently forced to suspend its rollout pending a rigorous safety review after reports of adverse events.
And the second one is indigenous, right?
Second, we have India's indigenous candidate, Dengue, developed by Panacea Biotech. While it is currently awaiting final regulatory approval, it utilizes the same foundational origin strain as the suspended Brazilian vaccine, which raises valid, intense regulatory scrutiny regarding its safety profile. Conversely, there is Kinenga, a two-dose vaccine that has successfully secured approval in the European Union.
With the climate warming, dengue is a massive threat.
When you consider that India suffers an estimated 15 to 20 million dengue cases annually, a number that is skyrocketing due to the expanding mosquito habitats caused by the climate warming we discussed earlier, securing a safe, highly efficacious, and cheaply scalable vaccine is a top-tier national health and economic priority.
And finally, rounding out our focus items, we have the development of the multi-layered ballistic missile defense, or the BMD system. Developed indigenously by the DRDO, it features a two-tiered architecture. You have the Pi-8 system, designed for high-altitude exoatmospheric intercepts above 50 kilometers, and the A8E system for lower-altitude endoatmospheric intercepts below 30 kilometers.
When you integrate this indigenous shield with the advanced S-400 systems imported from Russia, you create an overlapping defensive umbrella. Placed in the immediate context of the recent Operation Sindoor and the perpetually high military tensions with Pakistan, rapidly completing and deploying this impenetrable shield over strategic command centers like the Delhi NCR is a matter of supreme national survival. And discussing the deployment of that BMD system brings us completely full circle back to the intense geopolitical volatility and the hard power realities we started analyzing an hour ago. Finally, to truly master these complex, intersecting topics for your exams or your own policy understanding, you must be able to mentally visualize the physical geopolitical board. You have to know where these pieces are moving. Let's map out exactly where the critical events of today's deep dive unfolded.
Let's draw the map in our minds together. We start on the eastern coast of India, in Puri, Odisha, right on the edge of the Bay of Bengal. This city is world famous for the massive annual Rath Yatra festival and the awe-inspiring Sri Jagannath Temple, which was constructed by the powerful Ganga dynasty back in the 12th century. The sheer unstoppable momentum of the massive wooden chariots used in that festival actually gave the English language the word juggernaut.
From the Bay of Bengal, we fly west into the heart of the Middle East, specifically to Ras Laffan in the state of Qatar. This location is paramount. It is the single largest liquefied natural gas processing complex in the world. This is the exact physical location where the Indian tanker Disha docked to load its critical lifeline cargo of 62,370 metric tons of supercooled gas.
And we can trace the Disha's tense high-stakes path. From the loading docks of Ras Laffan, it navigated south through the incredibly volatile, militarized choke point of the Strait of Hormuz, broke out into the open Arabian Sea, and steamed straight across to arrive at Dahej in the Indian state of Gujarat. Dahej is vital infrastructure. It is India's largest and busiest LNG regasification terminal, situated strategically right on the Gulf of Khambat.
While mapping that energy route, we must also place a heavy strategic pin on the nation of Oman, located on the eastern edge of the Arabian Peninsula facing the Gulf of Oman. Its major deep-water ports, like Sohar and Duk, are of supreme strategic value to the Indian Navy because they sit physically outside the vulnerable Hormuz choke point, facing the open Arabian Sea directly. They provide an essential, secure bypass route for Indian commercial and naval shipping during times of severe Gulf crises.
Shifting our focus back to the European theater, we map Evian-les-Bains in France. It is a stunning, historic lakeside resort town situated on the shores of Lake Geneva, which served as a highly secure venue for the 52nd G7 summit. Then, moving south to the Mediterranean coast, we find Nice on the beautiful French Riviera, which was the location chosen for Prime Minister Modi and French President Macron to hold their intensive bilateral security talks.
We must also precisely map Bratislava, the capital of Slovakia. It sits right on the banks of the Danube River, and its geography defines its politics. It shares direct borders with Austria, Hungary, Poland, the Czech Republic, and crucially, it shares a highly sensitive eastern border with Ukraine. Understanding the reality of those specific borders instantly explains Slovakia's deep anxieties and its complex defense and security priorities within NATO.
And finally, to understand the fragility of the Middle Eastern ceasefire we discussed, we look at a 12th century Crusader fortress, Beaufort Castle in southern Lebanon. Sitting high on a strategic ridge overlooking the Litani River Valley, this ancient stone fortress was recently captured by the IDF during the ongoing brutal regional conflicts, proving that the geography of ancient wars still dictates the battle lines of modern ones.
When you take the time to lay the entire board out like this, it is genuinely marvelous and frankly more than a little intimidating to realize exactly how deeply, inextricably interconnected the modern world has become. The stark reality is that tactical military operations occurring around a 12th century stone castle in Lebanon, a compromised, dangerous tree falling onto a road during a sudden pre-monsoon storm in Delhi, and the daily production output of a highly advanced microchip factory operating in Slovakia. All of these seemingly disparate events eventually, inevitably intersect. And when they intersect, they directly impact the inflation rate, the energy security, and the daily life of an everyday Indian citizen. It definitively proves that in the 21st century, there is absolutely no such thing as an isolated event anymore.
That realization is the very essence of a holistic strategic understanding of geopolitics. I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative reflection to mull over as you review your detailed notes from today's session.
A parting thought.
We have spent a significant amount of time today dissecting the immense, terrifying fragility of physical and systemic choke points. We looked at the Strait of Hormuz controlling the lifeblood of our energy grid. We examined the brutal, single-exam gateways controlling the entire futures of our youth. We discussed the invisible 1.5-degree climate boundary dictating the survival of the Earth's ecosystems. If the 21st century is going to be defined by these continually tightening bottlenecks, then the ultimate true measure of India's strategic autonomy won't simply be our diplomatic ability to deftly avoid them. The true measure of our autonomy will be our capacity to build so much internal structural resilience economically, socially, and environmentally that when those choke points inevitably close, the nation can still breathe.
That is a profoundly powerful thought to end on and a perfect summation of the stakes involved.
Thank you for joining us on this massive, comprehensive journey today. Take the time to review those notes, trace those geopolitical maps in your mind, and keep actively connecting the dots between the local and the global. Until next time, keep diving deep.